My friend Darryl Cooper, he's the co-host of the Unraveling podcast, researcher and writer, also known as MartyrMade, which I would highly recommend as well. I'm subscribed to it. It automatically downloads on my phone, so that's how big of a fan I am. Darryl, first and foremost, the Cambodian Genocide. How does something like that happen? Because I know this sounds like a corny question, and maybe it's a dumb question, but it's so recent. I mean, this is the era of telephones. This is the late 70s, the mid to late 70s, and we're talking 25% of a country wiped out. How does that happen?
Well, that's a great question, and it's a very important one for the simple reason that there are similarities and differences between communist movements throughout the 20th century that reliably lead to the breakdown into totalitarianism and slavery and mass slaughter that always seems to occur. You know, the Berlin Wall might have been the first border wall in history that was meant to keep people in rather than to keep people out. It seems to happen in every communist regime, regardless of differences in culture or race or religion or even the specific formulation of communism that's being implemented in a given country. It happens regardless of scale, so that it breaks down just as reliably in small movements like the Jonestown Cult, which was an atheistic communist revolutionary organization, just as reliably as it does in a global empire like the Soviet Union. And so it's important to ask why that is. You know, the conservative answer that emerged during the Cold War was that this breakdown was due to the inherent unworkability of the collectivist economic system. And no doubt there's something to this idea. The inefficiencies of a command economy do lead to shortages and famines and all the rest of the things we're used to. And since the leadership is certainly not going to admit to themselves or to other people that their entire revolution was based on false assumptions, they instead start accusing internal and external enemies, the wreckers, the saboteurs, of being responsible for their compounding problems. And it's something you see with all political leaders to some degree. We see how excited Joe Biden was to be able to start blaming inflation on Vladimir Putin. Well, when things keep getting worse and keep getting worse, the need for new enemies on whom to blame the problems grows out of control. And that's when we get the purges and the general descent into a paranoid garrison state that we see over and over. But I really think that while the collectivist economic system certainly helps things along, greases the rails, there's something else that's always at play. And it's a thread that runs through all the communist disasters of the 20th century. And that has to do with the mentality of the communists and the social forces that are unleashed when they successfully whip up the most dissatisfied and resentful elements of any society to overthrow the existing order and to attack the people that they accuse of being responsible for all of their problems. Every society has people like that. Sometimes those people have very good reasons for being dissatisfied and resentful, but those people, who those people are, in any given society can be very different according to the local circumstances. You go back to the Russian Revolution and it was the urban proletariat. You look at Cambodia in the 1970s and it was the peasantry. Here in the United States, the old left that we had up through the 1960s really kind of failed to turn the working class into revolutionaries. And since the 1960s, the new left and their descendants have settled on racial and sexual minorities as their revolutionary base. One thing that does not change, however, is the shape and the identity of the people who lead these movements, who use those people at the bottom as their foot soldiers. You go back to St. Petersburg in 1917, in Phnom Penh in 1975, in our country today, the wizards behind the revolutionary curtain are always educated members of the intelligentsia from the middle and upper classes. That is, you can take that to the bank. You go through the list of top Bolsheviks who destroyed the Russian Empire in the name of the workers, and you won't find a worker among them. You'll find that virtually none of them had ever worked a day in their entire lives. They went from comfortable childhoods in prosperous families to university political activism, straight into revolutionary agitation in the underground. The Red Guards who went out into the countryside to liquidate the kulaks would look very familiar to anybody who's seen Antifa operate today. Mao's Red Guards during the Cultural Revolution came out of the universities, and Pol Pot himself was born to a prosperous family. He was educated at the most elite schools in Cambodia under the French colonial regime, and then he finished his education in Paris, which is where he picked up his communist leanings. Fidel Castro was a lawyer. You know, and today in the United States, it's not vatos from East LA who came up with the term Latinx. It came out of the universities. And these are people whose heads are full of theories, usually with very little experience or even contact with the real world. Communist revolutions, except maybe where they were imposed by the Red Army in Eastern Europe after the Second World War, are always and everywhere the product of an alliance between people high enough in the social hierarchy that they think they'll be insulated from the ensuing chaos, and people low enough that they don't think that the chaos can make things any worse for them.
Don't miss Jesse Kelly Breaks History, The Forgotten Genocide, the first episode of a new series available now exclusively for First TV supporters. Visit the First TV app or thefirsttv.com to subscribe and start watching today.